So, why do we get addicted to people who are inconsistent? Let's talk about it. By the way, I'm Dr. Sonya, a doctor of psychology and a SMEGS therapist. And yeah, I like to talk about psychology, sex, and relationships. So, let's get right into it. This is definitely a topic that I've covered multiple times in short form content, long form content, but I want to address it again. And this video is going to be less than 10 minutes. It's going to go straight to the point, and we're going to keep it to 3 points because that keeps me organized. At the end, I'm going to talk about how to actually implement a change, but this doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Breaking patterns never is. So number one, this is a psychological phenomenon, but we are attracted to inconsistent rewards. You've probably heard this scenario before, but the best analogy is slot machines. That is why people get so addicted to sitting there for hours and hours, because as humans, if we get a certain type of reward and then it gets taken away and then we get it again and we don't know when it's coming, like if we're dating somebody who's an inconsistent texter, for example, we accidentally get addicted to them and we don't realize we're doing it. It's subconscious. And unfortunately, just knowing about that doesn't necessarily help us with getting over that addiction. If you're dating somebody and you find that they're giving you a lot of attention and then they pull back, we like to call it breadcrumbing these days, and it seems to be a newer phenomenon, but also unfortunately very common. If you find that you're checking your phone often, trying to figure out if this person is going to text you, and you start getting anxious about it, then it's very likely that you're falling into the variable ratio trap. And if someone breadcrumbs, they're typically trying to keep you hooked with their words, but their actions aren't following through. So let me know below if you've experienced this, because I know a lot about psychology and a lot about relationships and a lot about attachment, and I still have fell victim to this in recent times, okay? I am not perfect. This is somebody who does not make you feel safe, but unfortunately, even if you have a secure attachment, but especially if you have an anxious attachment, then you're going to be more drawn to them, especially if you've dated other people in the past, because that lack of safety feels familiar and kind of fireworky and kind of exciting, and it might make you tingly in certain areas, if you know what I'm saying. Yes, those areas. Yes, magic content. What I've realized about breadcrumbing, and what I mean is what I've realized about inconsistent people, is that they don't always do it consciously, right? So when you think of breadcrumbing, you think like, oh, someone's an F-boy and they're really trying to F with your feelings, but humans are more complex than that. And even though it's not giving an excuse, it's helpful sometimes to think about how other people might be inconsistent because they have their own attachment issues or they have their own fears and anxieties. And if they're avoidant, they're not comfortable talking about those things, they haven't had healthy modeling, or they haven't had enough dating experience. So not to give them the benefit of the doubt of giving them a chance, but sometimes it could be helpful to think about the other person's situation, because sometimes we get breadcrumbed and we never get an answer for why they were so inconsistent. But I will say it's almost never, ever, ever about you. The problem is it makes you question your self-worth. And that brings me into number 2, attachment issues. So if you're unfamiliar with attachment styles, I will put a video up here or here where I've talked about attachment in the past, but there are securely attached, which is what you want to work towards, because it is a spectrum and you can work towards being securely attached. For example, I will say that every time I take an attachment quiz or reassess my life, typically it comes out that I am securely attached because I had a really great upbringing and I'm very lucky. However, I have had some toxic relationships. So when it comes to relationships, there is some anxiety tendencies that come up, especially if I'm dating somebody who is avoidant. That tends to lead to feelings of anxiety and questioning my self-worth and nervous system issues, okay? So regardless, it doesn't even matter if you have an anxious or avoidant or any type of insecure attachment. This happens to anybody, because if you're dating someone and you really like them and then they start switching it up, it's going to lead to negative emotions, and that's totally normal. So like I said, you could be securely attached and have a great upbringing, or you could have had an upbringing that isn't so great, and then unfortunately, like for example, you didn't get your needs met, you didn't have attuned parents. A lot of the time that leads to anxious or preoccupied or avoidant attachment. And like I said, you can watch my other videos if you don't know what those terms mean, this, therapy jargon, right? But the cool thing about attachment is once you start working on building healthy relationships, you're able to actually change that and work on secure attachment, but not if you're dating someone who's avoidant, and we can't change other people. So it's very important to get comfortable with stating boundaries, being really careful with being very mindful with how you're feeling when you are dating, journaling, voice noting, having a note in your phone where you're doing pros and cons lists and checking the facts just so you don't get carried away. Because as soon as you start questioning your worth, as you start feeling bad about yourself because this person is pulling back when it's really a them problem, that's when it's important to reassess. By the way, I've heard this advice going around of if he wanted to, he would, or if she wanted to, she would, or they would, etc. And I don't like this advice. For me, it seems very much a generalization, right? That assumes that somebody who's avoidant, for example, if they wanted connection, then they would follow through. But humans are a lot more complex than that, right? So someone could think that they want a serious relationship, that they want connection, or they might deep down want it, but they're not aware of that, right? And then try to jump into something, and then their attachment wounds come up, and they might not even be conscious of it because humans are so freaking complicated, right? Or they might be worried that, oh, I'm really catching feelings. Like, let's say you're the person who's dating the avoidant person, and the avoidant person starts catching feelings for you, and that feels scary. They might not know why. Maybe they're not in therapy. Maybe they had a clingy ex, whatever, right? Maybe they really want that, but the timing isn't good. Maybe they really want that, but they don't have enough experience and they need time to work on that emotional maturity. So no, it's not your compatible person right now. Maybe down the line after they get some therapy or do some self-work or have some more relationship experience. I just don't like the if he wanted to, he would, because it's a generalization and it just doesn't apply to a lot of situations that are a lot more complicated. And like I talked about before, we don't always know what the reason is, except for we know it's not us. Okay? Get that in your head.
Write that down, write that down!
All right, and for the sake of not getting too tangential, because I know I get a little bit tangential when I'm talking about things I'm passionate about, let's talk about number 3, and that is hormones. The reason why we feel addicted to people that are so inconsistent is because dopamine. We have a dopamine center of our brain. When we really like somebody and we get into a text or a voice note or a calling exchange, it really, really lights up our reward centers, our dopamine centers, when we get a text from them. And then as soon as they start pulling that away, we start looking for that dopamine elsewhere. That's why if you realize that things aren't working out with this person, or they're breadcrumbing you, or it just hasn't worked out, you might get right on the dating apps again because you're trying to get that dopamine and validation. But unfortunately, it's short-term gratification, kind of like going to Taco Bell or getting takeout last minute. It's not going to nourish you in the long run. And then of course there's sex hormones. So as I've talked about in so many videos, it's my favorite topic. Once you get intimate with someone, whether that's kissing or especially if it's sex, and quadruply if it's unprotected sex, then you're more likely to catch feelings. And that means that there's serotonin, oxytocin, and vasopressin, and that gets more released for women. Men, it gets released as well, but not as much. And I've talked about this in many different ways, but men typically have more of an oxytocin release when they have already established a connection and they feel like they're in love with that person, not when it's someone that you've met right off the bat. Not to say don't have sex on the first date, do whatever the fuck you want, because empowerment, right? If you want to get some dick, if you want to get some vajayjay, get some dick and vajayjay. I don't give a fuck. But be mindful that that might make you feel more attached. And unprotected sex, that's even worse. A lot more chemical exchange. So yeah. And also there's so many other reasons to use protection, but protect your heart too, besides your body. So implementing a change. This is not an overnight fix. It's really important to continue learning about your attachment style. There is an attachment project quiz. I will put it below. I'm not associated with them in any way, but it's pretty helpful for that self-reflection. And understand that even if you know these things and you still get caught up in these patterns, you're human, okay? It's important to be able to talk about this with someone if you have a support system, a family member, a friend who's not going to shame you, someone to sit in the mud with you, or a licensed therapist, of course, which could be really helpful. Chasing that dopamine and validation is really, really hard to resist, especially when we live in a world with, romantic comedies and portrayals of romance everywhere, right? And it's important to understand that yes, true love does exist, right? But it doesn't always happen like it happens in the movies, and that safety And having someone around that's good for your nervous system, like a secure attachment with somebody who is emotionally available and emotionally mature and can meet you where you're at. The timing is aligning, and the compatibility and the personalities, all of those things are really important. And what's really important is to know how to show up for yourself. And this might sound repetitive, I'm sure you've heard it before, but it's really important to learn how to regulate your own nervous system. You can't rely on another person for that. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. And if you'd like a video on regulating yourself, I'm more than happy to make one. But for example, I'm the type of therapist that really likes dialectical behavioral therapy. And if you're not familiar, it's a therapy by Dr. Marsha Linehan. I think it's Linehan or Linehan, really popular. And she has this great acronym called TIP. So it's temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. So if you learn how to use TIP skills in the moment to regulate, that can be really helpful. It's also important to move your body. I know it's like cliche to say go on a walk, but go on a walk, get it out, get out that energy. And if working out is a good haven for you, then that's good too. Using healthy distraction. There's so many different ways to regulate, but in terms of the tip skills, using ice is really helpful. So if you need to grab some ice and hold it in your hand and put it on your neck, that could be really helpful. So it's something I talk about with my clients. So I wanted to mention tip here, yoga, meditation, making sure to protect your peace before getting back into another dating dynamic. If you just got out of something with someone who's emotionally unavailable, because you might need a little bit of a breather for your nervous system because you just got off that roller coaster. Give yourself a little bit of a break before getting into another dating roller coaster, but I'm hoping the next one is more secure. This video was helpful for you. I do tend to disclose a little bit, but I recently got off a certain roller coaster ride myself. I like to be transparent with you guys. And I'm going to take a little break from dating because of it. But like I said, you can know so many things about psychology. You can know about your attachment style. And the thing is, when you meet people for the first time, you're meeting the representative. So don't be hard on yourself if you think I attract emotionally unavailable men and women, etc. Because the truth is, we just don't know until we get to know that person. Don't beat yourself up, okay? We can't control other people and how they're going to show up. And if we're going to catch feelings for the representative of who they present to you on the first couple of dates, then that's just a part of dating and being human. And I'm hoping people can start working on their self-awareness, but we don't have control over that. So please like and subscribe and turn on bell notifications if you like videos like this. I do post every week, usually on a Sunday. And I hope you make pleasurable decisions and decisions that are good for your nervous system, okay? The more attention that we give to our frontal lobe, our prefrontal cortex, the better off we are. And a great way to do that, like I said, is regulating your emotions, doing some yoga, going on a walk. That's going to help you activate your frontal lobe more often while checking the facts and not allowing people treating you poorly to question who you are, because you're the fucking shit, okay? And before I go on another tangent, because I'm so passionate about this, let's end the video here, okay? I'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye.